hear for the first time that hunger is prevailing in Gaza. More and more people haven't eaten for 1 day, 2 days, 3 days.
A stark warning from the head of the United Nations Agency for the Palestinians on Monday. Philippe Lazzarini and other UN envoys demanded an end to the war as they headed across Egypt's Sinai Peninsula to the Rafah crossing, the besieged Palestinian enclave's only entry point for aid. Days after Secretary General Antonio Guterres warned that thousands of Palestinians were simply starving. He warned of an implosion of order as hunger spreads, and Gazans who haven't eaten for days loot aid distribution centers and stop trucks on roads to try to find food for their families. The suffering is fueling fears of a mass exodus to Egypt. This is what Lazzarini said he saw on his last visit to Gaza.
Most of the people are just sleeping on the concrete. Winter is here, we have sewage water, they're struggling to find clean water, they're struggling to have food, and that was 2 weeks ago, before the offensive in the south.
Gaza has been under a full Israeli blockade since the start of the conflict more than 2 months ago, and the UN says too little aid is getting in. The war has driven most of Gaza's 2.3 million people from their homes. Gazans said people forced to flee repeatedly were dying of hunger and cold, as well as bombardment, describing desperate attacks on aid trucks and sky-high prices. Gaza health authorities say around 18,000 people have been killed in the crowded enclave, and conflict is intensifying. Mossab al-Khalut is caring for 2 seriously injured sons alone. His wife and daughter were killed when their home in the Jabalia refugee camp was bombarded. They've sought shelter in the European hospital in Khan Yunis. There's no treatment, no medicine, and no food in Gaza, he says. If they don't die from the war, they'll die from a lack of food, from hunger. After the collapse of a week-long ceasefire between Israeli forces and the Palestinian militant group Hamas, which controls Gaza, Israel began a ground offensive in the south last week. It has since pushed from the east into the heart of the city of Khan Yunis, with warplanes attacking an area to the west. On Monday, militants and some residents said fighters were preventing Israeli tanks from moving further west through the city and clashing with Israeli forces in northern Gaza, where Israel had said its tasks were largely complete.